I'm excited about all of it because I have no idea what's going to work. And that's great because I love that we are, as an aviation community, we're in an incredible time of trying things. We are experimenting, right? We're testing to learn versus testing to validate. And that's really exciting.
From Airheart Innovation Series, this is What Follows with Nate Thuli.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to What Follows, a podcast where we explore the people shaping aviation today and the ideas defining what comes next. I'm your host, Nate Thuli. I'm really excited for today's guest, Greg Morris, president of Scaled Composites, the legendary Mojave-based aerospace company, which is responsible for some of the most revolutionary experimental aircraft ever built, including Spaceship One, Proteus, Stratolaunch, and Global Flyer. Greg assumed role of president at Scaled Composites in April of 2023, following a long career as an experimental test pilot, aerospace operator, and flight test leader. Before joining Scaled, he served as president and chief test pilot at Gauntlet Aerospace, where he led flight test operations and worked closely with the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School. Over the course of his career, he has accumulated more than 7,300 flight hours across a wide variety of aircraft and experimental flight test programs. Let's get into this. Greg, thanks for joining us.
That's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on today. Excited to talk about airplanes.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, so your career now is deeply involved in aviation and experimental aviation and flight testing, and that you have a rich background in that now at this point. But where did that begin? How did you first get involved in aviation and in aerospace?
I think every little kid goes through their various phases where they're super passionate about something. It's dinosaurs and then trucks and then trains and then airplanes. And for me, my airplane phase started when I was about 7 years old. So it's been 36 years so far. If it ever goes back to dinosaurs, I'm going to have to spend a huge amount of money on paleontology school.
A whole other 36 years, right?
Yeah. I've just been a super enthusiastic and just had a passion for aviation and aerospace. I've been incredibly fortunate to be able to pursue it. When I was in high school, I was lucky enough to be able to pursue getting a private pilot's license and an instrument rating, and then did my undergrad in aerospace engineering at USC and was a flight instructor at that point as well. So I was teaching actually aerobatic and tailwheel flying. So I chose to go do that stuff and continue to broaden that experience and just learn more about airplanes. And then after I graduated, ended up starting my own business, initially as a flight school, and that morphed into some defense services by participating in the qualitative evaluation program, initially at Air Force Test Pilot School with the World War II T6. And that's part of what is really critical for test pilot education is, let's take a military test pilot, right? They have incredible depth of experience in their weapon system they're flying and the aircraft that they're flying. But when you become a test pilot, you need a great breadth of experience as well too. So one of the many things that those students do in the time they're going through their year at test pilot school is spend time flying lots of different weird airplanes. So I started off bringing a World War II T6 there to fly with the students there and just learned a ton, wonderful community of incredibly dedicated, hardworking people. And I really got excited about the test universe then. So I also decided to start a master's degree, which I got at National Test Pilot School at that point. So I'm not a test pilot school graduate. I got my master's from National Test Pilot School. And the distinction there is I didn't do the full flying program. And that was really cost driven, right? A full test pilot education is incredibly rigorous. It is not something that I could afford swiping my personal credit card for. But I was lucky enough to be able to get the master's degree. And then I grew from there and did some direct flight test work for target and chase work for the 412 Test Wing at Edwards, and then was lucky enough to get recruited to take over Scaled about 3 years ago now. And Scaled's been a company I've always just loved. When I graduated from engineering school, I sent one engineering resume to one company, and it was to Scaled. And the normal way you would expect this story to go, right, would be they got my resume and then I joined and then worked up through the company.
Got in, right? Yeah.
Definitely was not that. They clearly looked at my resume and said, well, this guy is useless. That's great. Forget about him. And immediately circular file. So 19 years later was taken over.
Yeah.
Recruited,
so
taking the company over.
You can successfully say the president that was also turned down 19 years prior to that, right?
I think I've technically applied for one job at Scaled, which I did not get. That's correct, yeah.
So there's a good lesson in perseverance there as well, I suppose.
Absolutely. And being lucky. I've been incredibly fortunate in my career.
Yeah. Well, and been able to fly a lot of incredible planes. So I know we're not supposed to pick our favorites. Airplanes are incredible. They're all amazing. I know. Has there been one that has caught your heart? Is there a plane that would jump out for you, or a type of plane, perhaps?
I am very grateful you put the caveat in the question that you did, because they are all great. I love
Yep.
any airplane that I can learn something from and that challenges me and makes me better.
Mm.
If I'm just want to go for a fun flight though, and just have sort of the pure joy of flying, really love the World War II T6. I was fortunate enough to own a
kidding.
1944 SNJ, the Navy version of the T6 for many years. And I've got just a bit under 2,000 hours in type. And
Wow.
I love that airplane. It's not fast, it's noisy, it vibrates, smells come out of it, and it's just this very pure flying experience. And it's not easy to fly. It makes you better every time you fly it. And I love that.
Yeah, well, and so there's a dichotomy there that I find fascinating then, of World War II technology, construction and engine and everything that goes with that is, the vintage cars of the automotive world, juxtaposed against, now at this point in your career, Scaled Composites. This is as forward-leaning as you can get, right? You guys are producing, on average, almost a plane a year. Is that right, for something new?
Actually, more than one
what's
per
that?
year, yeah.
That's incredible. And so what's that dichotomy like, with sort of this passion and alignment with this archetype of flying, but then applying that into this forward-leaning approach? That's fascinating.
Yeah, I think there is both a conflict between those things, but I would also approach it in a slightly different way. And I don't actually think they conflict with each other, in that you have to look at optimization for the mission. And it's one thing to pull on the World War II thread. I really appreciate very much about World War II aircraft is they were extremely purposely and well optimized for the mission they were trying to accomplish. And that's one thing, when I joined Scaled, I was really excited, frankly, just to learn the secret of Scaled. And I guess I'll share it publicly now, which is incredibly small teams, though, that are very focused on optimizing and tailoring what is the mission this airplane needs to do, right? Is this a demonstrator or is this a prototype? And the distinction between those is really traceability to production. What do we need this airplane to go execute? What do we need to learn from it, or what does it need to prove? How do we get that done as quickly as possible, right? Scaled is a company that optimizes for speed. So how do we do that fast, learn those lessons, and then take them into whatever may be next?
Fascinating. And so, not only highly experimental and iterative, but highly focused then, right? There's a singular focus at the team level, at the atomic unit of work, I guess you would say. And so you kind of led me right into a question I had in mind. From your perspective, Scaled represents a very different model of aerospace innovation, and you can see just the types of aircraft that have been coming out for decades now as a result. What are your thoughts on what separates that type of a team from a more traditional organization, and you were unpacking that a little bit, but anything else kind of come into there?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the key is that, again, it's really what is the mission of the organization, right? Scaled is good at a whole lot of things. It's also not good at a whole lot of things. I look at a company, building a Part 25 certified airliner, for example. Those are incredible aircraft. They're incredibly complicated, incredibly difficult to execute. And you have to structure your entire organization to be able to do that. So I would say, just like one might say a more traditional company can't put out one airplane per year, Scaled can't do that either. And so it's not a better or worse, it's really just different. And that's one thing I love about aerospace, is that we all can focus on what we're good at. And it is such a hard set of problems that we need this diversity in companies that they're focusing on. And then within companies, you also need diversity in every sense to bring knowledge to the table, to bring experience to the table, to be able to solve those types of problems. And so it is always really, it's easy to start getting into comparatives. And I try to avoid that simply because it is just different, right? Everybody's dealing with hard problems in aerospace. If you're not, actually, I'm trying to think, everybody is. Yeah. Full stop.
No, it's not easy. Yeah. No, for sure. And whether you're at the subcomponent level, or you're at the airframe level, or you're trying to go highly scalable, high producibility, or, one-off demonstration of a very specific subset of things, there's a lot of focus there. What about, The term innovation, I always hesitate to bring up the word innovation because I often feel like it's all too often overused or used wrong, unfortunately. We want to innovate, but often what we see is sort of an incremental refinement or an incremental improvement, and that's not really the same thing. And as an outsider looking in, it seems like at Scaled Composites, there truly is a departure, right? There's a more fundamental departure in the innovation space. Do you think that's the product of experimental aviation? Is that the product of culture? How does that come to be?
I think a lot of it is who we recruit, what we look for. We just finished our hobby day we had today. And so we're out just everybody bringing in their personal passion projects. And we've got, of course, there's someone who owns a DeLorean here because it's scaled. So, of course, somebody owns a DeLorean, right? We've got folks incredibly passionate about black and white photography. We had folks talking about rock climbing. We've got, model train enthusiasts. It's wonderful just to see people who really dig into and love something. And we really recruit for that aggressively. We want to see people that are very passionate. And I think when you take that passion, what comes with it is a desire to experiment. If you just love something and you want to learn more about it and you want to try stuff, in the nature of my role, I put long hours in. There's always someone here when I leave. I wish it wasn't always the case, but there always is. We've got incredibly dedicated folks just working hard. And that willingness to take conscious risk is also a critical part of this, right? And when we talk about risk, we really try to disaggregate risk and break it down and really talk about what kind of risk are we talking about, right? We're talking cost, schedule, technical, what are we discussing here as we break that apart? So it is partially how you enable that culture of innovation. It also helps because of the nature of our programs with demonstrators and prototypes. We are going to build, we've got more than 30 active programs right now. So we have small teams moving fast, doing lots of different stuff. And it's an incredible advantage because we're in that demonstrator and prototype space. Our project cycle time is very short. So people get that steep part of the learning curve again and again. And it also helps because part of the reason why Scaled did focus on composite construction, right? One of the reasons why Burt Rutan, right, our founder, was very dedicated with composite construction is that ability to make changes relatively easily. So I will take an example on a program. When we build a pressurized cockpit, we always build a pressure test article with that to test it. But we will usually build the flight article at the same time as the pressure test article. And people go, how does that help you? You built them the same way. If you find a problem in the pressure test article, how do you deal with that in the flight
article? Just replicate it, right?
But it's composite construction. We can always add plies. We can always strengthen. We can always add more to it. It's very easy to do that. And it is partially that recognition of what is a real risk and what is a perceived risk that allows that innovation, right? Where are my off-ramps? Where are my real decision points? How far can I go down to try something before I have to decide, yep, that doesn't work, time to pivot.
Interesting. And it's somewhat of a risk analogous example of going through a one-way door or a two-way door. It's kind of like, hey, how long until we now are actually at a point where there's an inflection point, there's an adjustment or something that needs to be made. I've never heard risk deconstructed that way before. That's interesting.
Yeah. And the one-way door, two-way doors, we talk about that way sometimes too. Part of my role also is to help foster and create a culture where that's okay. And that is a core leadership challenge that exists, I think, to create an organization. If you want to allow and empower and enable small teams to go fast, I firmly believe leaders need to be a little bit uncomfortable. If I know everything that's going on in every program in the company, people are probably spending too much time talking to me. So I need to make sure that I know what's going on, but also there is a healthy level of autonomy for teams that are trusted to be able to go fast. Now, there's obviously guardrails on that because you can't, run off a metaphorical cliff. That doesn't work.
Right.
And we have systems to prevent that. But it also means that it's got to be okay when someone does share, I don't even want to say bad news, but an undesirable outcome, for example, of a subscale test or of something in design. And as leader, I find even controlling my initial reaction to that, even my initial facial expression is critical for that. And so sometimes I grew up in Chicago, but I'll revert to surfer lingo. It's like, bummer. When someone brings me something that's not what they wanted that day.
Yeah. No, it's good. I mean, culture it's formed in the expressions, the tone of voice, the response to things, all of that, without even realizing it, the bummer or are you kidding me? Those have cascading effects,
Yeah, the gains are dialed up really high on everything that a leader says, right? And it's important to recognize that they're going to go either direction. But I think part of that too is that at Scaled, everybody participates, right? Everybody is directly delivering where they came from. So I'm still one of our test pilots, still get to do some flight tests. It's to go super nerdy for any classic sci-fi novel folks out there. It's like the old Robert Heinlein Starship Troopers, the book, not the movie, but the book. Everybody drops, everybody fights, right? Everybody kind of delivers the core product to the company. That also helps keep that cultural alignment and helps that create that deep sense of ownership because every senior manager at Scaled goes back to and spends some part of their day as an individual contributor in their specialty. And that helps with that cultural alignment and even just that emotional recognition that, hey, my boss's boss understands the challenges that I'm facing because they deal with them as well.
Fascinating. So while we're talking about communication, and you mentioned that all of the parallel projects that are going on and all of the, I guess I would argue, a lot of experimentation going on, a lot of iterative work going on, how do you organizationally capture lessons learned, right? So that as one effort is going out for one demonstration or another and kind of proving out what that can be, clearly there's cross collaboration going on, or there's knowledge sharing that's going on. How does that get woven into that? So you have autonomy, but at the same point, you're still unified and sort of sharing the best practices.
Yeah, we do try to document very heavily and document those lessons learned. And it's in many different forms, but at the end of every program, we have especially the large program, especially, a lessons learned document that gets created. And the rules for that are everybody puts it in whatever format they want, share the information whatever way you want, and everybody contributes. And so we give them some time to do that. It means you get a document with, 30 different formats and nothing lines up. I always joke and say if somebody wants to share theirs with interpretive dance, figure out how to include the video and we'll put it in there. Because we don't want the format to get in the way of the content. And I want people to express themselves in the way that they're most comfortable expressing themselves. They can do that's cleanest. Some people write bullets. Some people write Faulkner-esque massive paragraphs. And that's great. There's no wrong answer. It's however somebody just shares their pure lessons learned and their feelings. And I want them to lightly edit it, if at all, just send it. And we try to document that way. We also do that during programs. If there's lessons that are learned, programs, there are departmental meetings, those lessons learned are shared. And because they are small integrated teams, it really helps with that. And the team will stay with the program through its entire time. If you are, for example, an engineer designing the hydraulic system on an airplane, you will be the responsible engineer, typically on the console during the flight test of that aircraft. Now that, of course, brings benefit forward in time, like you'd expect. You bring knowledge with you, right? You designed the system. Of course, you know the system very well. But it brings a benefit backwards in time as well, which is that deep ownership, and that it's very difficult, right, to structure organizationally. But there's no handoff. You're going to be with the program forever. And you're probably sitting a few desks away from that project pilot, that test pilot that's going to go fly that vehicle as well too. So you have that deep connection to the product, which helps. So less on the lessons learned side, but more on how do you make sure people want to share those lessons learned, right? Because that's part of it too. That ownership is what really creates that desire in an organization to be better.
There's something very human about that I guess I got to admit, surprised me a little when we're talking about highly advanced technical development, very rapidly and technically capable work. And yet culturally, there's also woven into that DNA, the human aspect of that. I mean, the way you were describing that is almost as if you're talking to, a group of artists instead of engineers. It's fascinating. And like the expression of that, has that always been part of the culture for Scaled Composites? So that's incredible.
I mean, I'm one of the newer folks at the company. I've been with the company a little more than 3 years. But one thing I did early on in my time here, and Burt Rutan, our founder, has been very generous to me. Actually, the day I took over from Corey Burt, my predecessor's president, who's an amazing person. He started as a fabricator and rose through the ranks in the company to become a self-taught engineer and then eventually the president of the organization. But the first day I'd formally taken over from Corey, Burt came to visit. Burt doesn't really come to visit anymore much. He's in Coeur d'Alene. He's got a beautiful home up there. He's enjoying his retirement. He has earned it. And I think it was pretty clear he was sniffing me out and figuring out who's this guy that's running my company now, because I'm the first person to run Scaled that never worked for Burt And that was really the crux of our conversation. And I really wanted to pick his brain on how do you build that culture? How did he build that culture? And then how do I sustain that? And, we're still in touch. I try to go up and work remote at least once a year. I'm overdue for that. I'm actually renting his house in Mojave from him. I'm living in his old pyramid, which is amazing. It's an amazing home that he designed, and none of it really makes sense, and it works perfectly at the same time. It's very much like the airplanes in that sense, right?
Yeah,
You look at it and you go,
I was going to say that
I don't get it, but it's perfect.
Written all over it. Yeah,
Exactly.
that goes hand in hand, I would say.
But so it's been part of it for a long time. But to your original question, though, it is the most highly technical organization is still made up of humans. And we need to recognize that. It's not, systems are good. We need systems to do things, but it's humans that work within systems. And how do you motivate, recognize, and just make it a human place to work? Because I believe that's when you get the best performance. You get the best performance out of people. You get that dedication. You get them bringing their full self to work if they can truly be themselves there too. That helps. If you feel like you have to leave part of us at home, then you're not bringing that diversity of background, of experience, of every sense to your job to figure out what's next.
Yeah, and there's a totality of the human that is just not coming forward then. So I want to flip the human in the loop on its head for a second. So you've had the chance to fly a lot of different planes and been around even more, right? And around highly advanced aircraft systems and, different layers of automation and the implementation of tech. I'm curious on your observation of are aircraft systems being optimized more for capability? So what it can be from pushing the capability envelope, or are modern aircraft systems continually looking at the human that's in the loop, our cognition, our capability of what, the pilot that's ultimately going to be there operating the system? Or is it still kind of focused on the capability of the system itself?
Well, it's interesting. I guess I will answer your question by slightly disagreeing with its premise, if I may.
Yeah.
I think that you again have to optimize those two things. If you're talking about a system with a human in the loop, the human is a part of, and therefore that system must be optimized to work with and work for that human. So it's not a question of and, not or. It's those interfaces that I personally find really fascinating. How do you optimize so that you get the best performance in every way? So the amount of information that a modern aircraft can present is eye-watering. The amount of capability that exists in modern aircraft is truly eye-watering.
More than a human can process, I would say. It's capable of presenting a tremendous amount.
Absolutely. For personal development right now, I'm in the process of just starting to work on an A320 type rating, just because I don't know much about airliners, and so I'm trying to solve that. So I was actually last weekend in the sim for about 10 hours and learned a ton. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And there's so much going on to optimize the aircraft for that mission that's very impressive, right? I really enjoyed it. I learned a ton. That it's really important to find that balance, but you get the best performance out of the total system by optimizing the human segment of it.
Yeah, I love that. And then with that confidence in the system, right? I mean, you were talking about, sitting at a console when you're a few people away as the pilot that's actually going to go fly that airframe. And many times in Scaled Composites history, and I would even say in your personal career, flying a plane sometimes for the very first time, right? And there can be a tremendous amount of, I guess, stress and uncertainty, but it draws to mind this idea of a pilot who's confident in the plane. What would be some facets that you're not necessarily on a very first test flight, but just now as you're becoming part of that human that's part of that total system, what lends itself to confidence in the cockpit then?
Yeah, that's good. So I will put the caveat on, as a test pilot, I have not been fortunate enough to truly do the first flight of a new type. And especially in my role now, I know I never will, because I'm very lucky I still get to fly. But if the president of Scaled is also doing the first flight, that's the wrong answer, right? I've got too many other duties.
It's an unnecessary risk, of course.
I think less the risk point. Your point is valid and it's correct. I think the key is, though, I have an incredible staff of test pilots. They're all incredibly experienced. They don't have the multitasking that I would have to deal with. They can dedicate their whole self to that. So I'm just not the right person to assign to that flight. So, which is good.
Makes sense.
I've actually told my flight ops department, give me there's no bad deals in aviation, but give me the quote bad deals. So that's,
Sure.
I'll get the 1 a.m. brief times, which is great.
Mhm.
I usually regret telling them that when that's the case, but that's okay.
Yeah.
But I think to your question though, Scaled staffs project pilots at the beginning of a program. So the test pilot is embedded in the program from day one. They are providing a really critical engineering function throughout that entire project. And so they are part of the team making the airplane. They've been deeply involved, right? Nobody figuratively parachutes in at the last moment, jumps in, straps it on, and goes. In that day of test execution, I do believe that one of the core roles of a test pilot, right, is to help to provide an emotional stability and damper to the team in a way to be able to allow them to perform. If a test pilot is the most excited person in the room, that's probably not the right answer. Kind of like we're talking about before with leaders, the gains are dialed up pretty high. When you're going to a test flight, the gains are also dialed up a little bit.
Of course.
And so it's important to have that test pilot be the person who's going to take that aircraft up and going to actually go fly it, is an emotional regulator for that, but also willing to say no if it's not right, because you can't lean forward, right? We have to recognize, manage, mitigate, and then consciously choose to accept or not to accept risk in this business. That's the core of flight test. And that's really the skill that I think differentiates test pilots from others, is really detailed risk analysis, management, mitigation, and then again, conscious acceptance or rejection, both of which are valid.
Yeah. Wow. And again, with the soft skills interwoven into what is a very technical, very rigorous method. It's fascinating. I mean, of course, it's a group of humans doing something incredible together, and there's a lot of soft skill management that goes into making that all possible. That's fascinating.
I got rejected for an engineering job here, so I better lean into other skills then.
Yeah, exactly. Well, maybe there's that. Yeah. So I want to lean in a little bit on automation. So as airframes become, or aircraft and aircraft systems become more advanced and more capable, and often in some ways more complex, not necessarily, automation has been, you were talking about A320 and learning that a little bit. There's an airframe that even flight controls are simplified, right? Like there's a level of automation. What are your thoughts on the right way to introduce automation without disconnecting the pilot from flying? And I think about, your World War II T6, no automation, right? You are very, very, very much involved with the mechanical nuts and bolts and fabric of that aircraft. And there's that human machine interaction is not severed in any way. Fast forward to, really any kind of modern high performance aircraft, there's a different relationship between pilot input and aircraft behavior. What are your thoughts on how to introduce automation? Do you have a philosophy, I guess, on the right way to do that without disconnecting the pilot?
It really drives back to what is the mission. And, the mission I can execute with that World War II T6, I can go up on a pretty nice day. I can fly around for maybe up to about 3 hours and I can land. That's pretty much it. I look at like an A320 and it can take almost 180, actually more than 180 people now, about 180 people, depending on seating configuration, thousands of miles, all weather, any time of day, and do it
long duration,
safer than you can do it driving a car, safer than any other mode of transportation. That is incredible. And then you look at, for example, a military aircraft, and you look at what is that mission? How's it going to go execute that? And it's interesting because a lot of people are talking about that now, but it's actually not a new problem. There's a really good book called Tiger Check by Stephen Fino about, the role of the fighter pilot in military aviation, how that changed over time from almost World War I about till today. And the challenge we face now with how does that role of a pilot change is not actually a new challenge. He tells it's a bit tough to find. I think it's on Amazon. Very good book, worth a read if you're interested. He talks about the introduction of radar ranging gun sights in the Korean War and initial rejection of that by some pilots, which was an overall reduction in effectiveness. And then the shift that was then required in the Air Force community to really understand the benefits and limitations of that system, how to properly employ it in combat. And then it made, in general, right, the whole community significantly more effective.
Hmm.
And so we talk, especially as we look at bringing in autonomous aircraft, both in the civil and in the military space, we are dealing with those same types of challenges, but it all dials back and drives back, I should say, to what is the mission we are trying to accomplish and how do we approach that?
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah. And then it's kind of like, if you can hyper focus on what that is, maybe it starts to shape a little bit of, hey, you know what, this is something that we can let the machine manage. Or there's something we need the machine to manage, right? And it kind of goes, I guess, both ways for that. So I'm sure there's probably more you can't talk about than you can when it comes to some of the incredible stuff coming out. And I had a pretty long time in the Air Force myself, so I understand the dichotomy of worlds. But for what you can talk about, there's a lot of really interesting trends going on in aviation. And here just in Long Beach, where Earhart is located, we've got a couple urban air mobility eVTOLs right near us. Up in Mojave, my goodness, you're at a hotbed for just a tremendous amount of cutting edge development going on. Looking at kind of the plethora of new tech that's coming into the world, I'm curious, is there stuff that's kind of firing you up of you are really excited about, what this trend or this area that we're going, what's sparking on your radar right now?
Yeah, I'm excited about all of it because I have no idea what's going to work. And that's great because I love that we are, as an aviation community, we're in an incredible time of trying things. We are experimenting, right? We're testing to learn versus testing to validate. And that's really exciting. I mean, a couple things, I'll pick one that really fires me up right now. It's exciting is Jet Zero. We are partnered with them. We're building their demonstrator aircraft. I'm recording this in the hangar where we're doing that right now.
Very
It's
cool.
awesome,
Okay.
right there down in Long Beach as well with you. Got really neat company bringing the blended wing body to scale to prove the efficiency of that platform. And I remember first really learning about blended wing bodies when I was an undergrad at USC, and my aircraft design professor had done some work on blended wing bodies in his professional life. And that's Mark Page, who's now the CTO of Jet Zero. So luckily he doesn't remember me because I was an unremarkable student. So I was very fortunate in that sense, which is great. He's a great professor, learned a ton, and just a great human. And it's really exciting to be able to bring this aircraft to life and to try this and to prove the efficiency of this and hopefully change the airliner business in a positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. And from the photos or renders that have come out too, I think when you look at that kind of design language, it's also just beautiful to look at. There's just nature inspired, and you see a lot of that kind of coming into being. And there's the artistic form of it, I suppose. It gets pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's inspiring. Last year I was part of a panel at AIAA speaking about the Jet Zero project. And it was right after my daughter's birthday. She just turned 11. I was going to get an early flight to Vegas, where AIAA was that year, to give the talk. And I was telling her, hey, you know what? I'm going to be gone by the time you wake up. But this is what I'm going to go do. I'm going to go talk about this project that we're doing. She said, can I see a picture of it? So I showed her one of those renders. Her reaction was, wow, that's so cool. And I said, yeah, it's an airliner. So she said, you mean I could get to fly on that one day? And just that inspiration and that enthusiasm for it. It inspires me. It's what keeps me going. I remember being that kid of, hey, maybe I can fly on that one day. To get to be a part of that, I'm just incredibly fortunate. And it's super cool to see what's coming. There is so much exciting stuff going on right now from an airframe standpoint, from a subsystem standpoint, from an automation standpoint, from a safety standpoint of just how do we do aviation better? Because aviation's still pretty new, right? 123 years. And coming up in December, we'll hit the 123rd anniversary of controlled powered flight.
Yeah, wow.
That's a blink. And you consider...
in the human timeline for sure, right?
Yeah. Orbital Wilbur sitting on the top of a hill flipping a coin for who's going to fly first. It still gets me every time.
Yeah, and now look at where it is. That personal story got me well too. I have two daughters. Older daughter is 12, and I've had that question as well of could I fly this, Dad, or could I be could I do this? And it gives me chills because it's just this incredible world of aviation. I want to be mindful of your time. I guess the last question I would have for you then is for someone wanting to get into aviation. And we started off the conversation of, hey, your own origin story into that. And I love asking that question because, I've been fortunate enough to talked to a fair number of people about getting into aviation, and everybody has a different start. Everybody had some sort of kind of point of ignition, and it's just fascinating to look at that. Now, fast forward, now it's 2026, and one of the core missions for us at Earhart is we're trying to make aviation not only safer but more accessible. We want to break down the barriers to help people get into it. And what piece of advice would you have for someone wanting to get into aviation or curious about it, or maybe held back on? We've hit upon a few of the inaccessibility pieces of it. Of it's expensive, and often we make go or no go decisions on an aircraft or an aviation decision based on if we can afford to do whatever it is we need to do, the training or the plane. But what advice would you have for someone on maybe do I want to get into aviation, or could I? Is it something I'm capable of doing? What are your thoughts there?
I think that the key thing with aviation is that it's one of these fields that you don't actually have a choice. It's you either have to be in it or you don't. And if you have to be in it, you have to be in it. And that's where you'll be happy. I did talk a bit about sort of my origin as well, but my path was definitely not linear, and I could not have predicted it. When I was growing up, I'd wanted to pursue flying in the military. But when you get glasses and you're 7 years old and you graduate from high school in 2000, that's not a thing, right? I was well outside any of the vision standards, any of the waivers, any of those processes. And when that path was closed to me, I thought that it sort of foreclosed all the things I'd want to do in aviation. I had no sense of what was in store for me. And I am very, very fortunate. I'm fortunate to have been able, to contribute, to support the military and help contribute to that mission for warfighters. In a way, I've been incredibly fortunate to be able to be part of Scaled and part of this organization and still to be involved in flight test. It's not linear. If you think you can map out a 5-year plan in aviation, all I can do is guarantee you that you're wrong.
Yeah.
We have an old joke when we're scheduling flight tests. If we look 3 months out and there's 3 tests all scheduled for the same day, the answer is don't move any of them because they'll naturally deconflict, right? Something's going to change.
It's not going to happen.
Exactly. That's the only scenario won't occur is they will not all occur when scheduled. So that's the one you can be confident of.
I love the certainty of that. That brings a little personal comfort because we actually have a test flight scheduled for 2 days from now. And every time leading up, there's sort of this compression of final tasks and okay, so it's not just us where, there's always something. But
it's a really hard business. That's why you got to love it. There are easier fields. There are easier jobs. There are easier industries. There is no spreadsheet that says aviation is a good choice in this sense, unless you love it. If you love it, there's nothing else you can do. And then you'll be so happy. And that's great. And there's so much, so much opportunity. And there's going to be so much change in aviation, as there always is. This is still a nascent field, right? We were 66 years from that first power-controlled flight to landing on the moon. Watching Artemis 2 was incredibly inspiring. I watched the reentry with my kids, and when I was texting my daughter about, the timing for the translunar injection, I got emotional just typing out translunar injection. I'm 44. That has never happened in my lifetime. The last one was in 1972, 10 years before I was born. The fact that we are back exploring and we're growing it's just incredible. It's so cool to see. And I'm so fortunate to be a tiny part of it, and encourage anyone, if you want to do it, you will not end up where you plan, and it'll be better.
Yeah. And that'll be a great outcome, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Greg, I really appreciate not only the time, the advice, your perspective, and really everything that you're doing for aviation as well. I can see the passion in what you're doing. I got to say, I love seeing the human aspect of that just interwoven with your entire philosophy with that. It's incredible. It's inspiring. And thanks very much for taking the time to be on the podcast today.
I really appreciate the invitation and the conversation. This is all just super cool. Airplanes are cool.
Yeah, absolutely. They are. All right. Thank you. Have a good one.